right. I want to shout out to everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sauce Society. I am your host, Ed Honcho, and your additional host, Mr. Man Things. Make sure I get this properly placed here. All right, there we go. So this evening, we're going to be talking about some things. So let me fix that. And one main topic. That main topic that we're going to be speaking on tonight is corporal punishment. Does it hurt or help children? So we're going to touch on whether or not there are any actual benefits. Is it proven to prevent children from growing up and becoming, criminals? Is it proven to have any kind of benefit to children? So we're going to touch on a couple of those things tonight, and see we get a couple of folks in. And so, Mr. Man Things, if anybody didn't catch, the last episode, it wasn't last week's.
It's been a minute. Yeah. It's been hard, dude. It's been hard to get this all together.
Yeah, it's been some time and issues, some things, some off and on. So like I say, is there anything you want to, say to the people or introduce yourself to some of the newer folks? I think we may have a couple of people in who may not have been in last time.
Really? Real Family and Brandon are here. Rising Phoenix. Who was it that changed his name to Rising Phoenix, man?
Duck Scout.
Duck Scout. Okay. Yeah. Hey, thanks for coming, everybody. We're going to cover some good ground. We're going to play some video games. We're going to, do a little bit of BS. But for those of you guys who didn't catch a Saw Society or didn't catch up on it, we do monitor the chat, but it's more of Ed and I talking about whatever Ed and I want to talk about. So it's not that you're not important. It's just that you're not as important.
Yeah. So what we want really is to stir a conversation amongst yourselves in the chat. So you guys, I want to know, and we'll definitely be able to come back and check some things out. But if you guys ever want to introduce a topic to Sauce Society, you can, let me make sure I get the email correct. I saved it. I want to say, is it societymailbag@gmail.com?
Oh, man, I think it was. I'll have to check that out real quick.
It's in the description on this. It's in the link in the description. I don't have the description.
Oh, is it? Hang on. I got it up right here. Yeah. We got Twitter. We got read full description. Yeah, let me pause this real quick. You've got our Twitters, but we do not have the mailbag.
The mailbag's not on there? Okay, I thought I
Let me go incognito on one of these screens over here, one of my other screens, and then I will see where the mailbag is.
Okay. But yeah, so basically, like I said, if there's ever a topic you guys come across, so we're going to cover a wide array of topics, from politics to, just general life, manhood and, how it's under attack and various things that are going on in our society. That's what the society is in Sauce Society. And so if you guys come across any news stories or anything like you would like us to speak on, and once we get this back on a regular schedule, we'll make sure to check those out and speak on them on the next episode. So as we find the email for that, though, we're going to get into, like I said, talking about corporal punishment. And I know most of us, or I would think that most of us, that's something that we can relate. If you don't know what corporal punishment is, it's simply spanking, but a proper word for spanking. And, I know a lot of people, me personally, growing up and especially, in the neighborhood and everything. Kids got spanked all the time. We knew it. That's just, it's a thing that you crack jokes with your friends. Oh man, if I wouldn't have, spanking kept me out of jail, or, you would say that you'd have stories about how you got whooped and why you got whooped and, things like that. So this society member, okay, good deal. And so it's something that we can, relate to, or a lot of people have these similar stories that they can relate to from getting whooped. Some people will say, hey, it was a little bit more aggressive. Some of us may have only received spankings by hand. I can recall some stories with various family members, grandparents, my mom, my dad, with belts, switches, maybe a shoe or something like that. And, but growing up, we always thought that, that was just kind of the way it is. And, I kind of think that, one that's passed down because their parents probably, raised them like that. And so they felt like, well, hey, that's the way that you execute discipline. But we've talked about things, and I know Man Things has done some extensive research and kind of looked up some things. What would you like to, I'm going to allow you to introduce it. What is it that you came across, in your research on, you know, corporal punishment and spanking and the benefits or negative impact that it can have, you know, on raising children?
So what I did, I'll pull it up here in a little bit, and I went through the college library, and I got access to a whole bunch of different materials. But there's one study that's kind of like the end all be all conclusive study, and it is this. Let me bring it up right here for everybody, so everybody can see. You'll be able to see at least half of it. So this is what they call a meta-analysis on child spanking and outcomes. And what a meta-analysis is any study, not just any article. You know, it's not opinion pieces. This is an analysis of any clinical study that has gravitas to it. And they take every study from a selective period of time, or every study that's ever been conducted on corporal punishment, and they sift through all the data, they combined all of the data, and then they look at the trends again based on all of the study. So you can read right here how extensive this is. Meta-analysis focused specifically on spanking were conducted on a total of 111 unique effect sizes representing 160,927 children. So if you talk about the sample size, which is that 160,000, almost 161,000 kids, we cleared drugs on smaller sample sizes than that. And that's why you see, you know, Lunesta can help you sleep at night, but it may cause anal fissures and yada, yada, yada. So the reason it's so it's such a big impact is because you're talking about a meta study of over 160,000 children. The biggest takeaway that I had from this was how much that percentage of the population is. So around the world, about 80% of children are spanked. So you've got 80% of the entire world's population that's had some form of corporal punishment. Oh, they probably can't read that very well. I'm peeping the chat. I got to figure out a way to blow this up. Hang on, let me try to zoom in on this, so that I can, now when I zoom in, I can't pan around. Let me try to get it right about there. So you've got 80%, and it has detrimental effects on 80% of the population. So let's say that nobody had ever been spanked before, and then all of a sudden they just said, like, you know, like the bell went off, bing, beat the shit out of your kids. You have 80% of the population now who is going to grow up with the long-term effects of corporal punishment. And the biggest takeaway from that is how it affects men and women. And these are just some of the effects, but these are the two biggest ones that I found. Women who receive corporal punishment before the age of 13 and up until the age of 18, they were 85% more likely to stay in a violent relationship, you know, somewhere where they're with a partner who is part of like domestic abuse. So that was one of the big takeaways right there for women. And then men who were beaten as young kids, and when I say beaten, I don't mean like, you know, lashed all to hell. I just mean simply spanked in the clearest definition of it. Like, I did something wrong, I got one spanking. They excluded examples of childhood abuse and physical abuse out of this because they wanted to look at the behavioral effects of only people that got spanked, not people that had been abused. So they weren't looking at someone who, you know, parents put cigarette butts at them or anything like that. Men who were spanked they accounted for about 95% of all of the people who were guilty or found guilty of domestic violence. So for women, it creates a higher likelihood that a woman, as she grows older, is going to stay with someone who is violent or physically abusive or even mentally abusive or verbally. And then for the men, they are more likely to be that antagonist. So that was what was really interesting to me. And, you know, and like I said, this is 80% of the world's population, according to UNICEF, and this was as early as, or as late as 2014 that was done.
So, excuse me. So, okay, with these things that are taking place, and it's showing that, like you say, that women have a higher likelihood of, staying in a relationship that is abusive, that, excuse me, apologize for the phlegm and stuff, and, also having a negative impact on men. I see something in the chat that makes me wonder, it makes me question this. This being America, but you said this is a study that was actually taking place worldwide, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I wonder, what do you believe the impact of religion is on spanking in this belief? Maybe that's something that is perpetuating this situation. Do you think that may have anything to do with it? Because I see, some Bible verses, spare the rod, spoil the child,
right.
Something we're familiar with.
Right.
What do you feel like the impact of that, or if that is an underlying situation that, may keep this habit going?
My personal belief, and I'm not, again, we never attack anyone. We say whatever's on our minds, but, eventually we'll get to when we don't have to speak with qualifiers just to tell people what we think. My opinion of religion's place in this particular argument is the purpose of religion is absolution. So you get a free pass because it's what you're supposed to do. And that's pretty much it. Whenever you say, well, the Bible says this, if you believe every word of the Bible is true, then you can't possibly believe that spanking your kids is bad. But at the same time, even if you have some negative thoughts about it, then you go read the Bible and you get reinforcement that you've done no wrong. So I think the religion part is a big key in there, because for the majority population of the world, all religions say more or less the same thing. It's different for some Islamic cultures, because even a 13-year-old boy can be head of the house, but it's far more severe for women there. But more or less, religion is a kind of like the proponent of this, because it was the Quakers that originally forced corporal punishment into the mainstream in America. The Pilgrims and the Puritans never thought twice about not hitting their kids. It wasn't something they had to do. When you were 8 years old, you were up and you were tending the field. So it's kind of like a Johnny-come-lately problem. But it was originally the Quakers that pushed for corporal punishment in academia as well.
Okay. That's interesting. That's something I didn't know. Well, you learn something new every day. I thought they just made the oatmeal. Well,
it's like, the whole in God we trust thing. That wasn't a thing until after World War II. Or World War I or World War II, I forget. But they started putting in God we trust on money afterwards. And several, not the majority of, but several of the founding fathers had severe issues with religion, and that's why they wanted religious freedom. But you have to look at like 50 different documents to get an opinion on what it was. And even then, they had people that were for and against it, but they just said, hey, the individual has their right to religion. We're not going to do this whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I see why I said there's no notifications. It's really far behind with notifications. I think if we're gonna try to get this right, because either Honcho's part of the YouTube purge and all the associated channels that he's got are part of that, or it just takes a long damn time. So maybe next time we'll just dick around and put a countdown up on the screen. We'll start the stream, maybe, Honcho, if that's good with you.
Okay. Because I'm trying to see no notification. Yeah, that's no bueno. Yeah, that's what we'll have to see what's going on. So you kind of want to we can touch on it. Like I say, I'm trying to look and see what's going on with these settings here real quick, and if I can see anything different.
While you're doing that, I'll just hit on this real quick. Let me see if I can get it zoomed in far enough to get it over on the other side of the page so I can show the conclusion to this. I don't know if it's gonna show up in the stream or not. I think my fat head might cut it off. Come on, let me see how it's gonna look. There's a little bit of a delay here. All right, so the conclusion they came up with this study was across the designs, countries, and age groups. That means that no matter what limiting factors they put in their study, no matter how restrictive it got or no matter how open-ended it got, it was always the same thing. Spanking has been linked with detrimental outcomes for children, and that's a fact supported by several key methodologically strong studies that isolate the ability of spanking to predict child outcomes over time. So that's where I was saying, the magnitude can be understated, but the effects can't be overstated. It's one of those things where you just like I said, I'll put it this way. If I wanted someone to take a look at my roof, I wouldn't call a dentist over to my house and ask him what he thinks about my roof. So if I want to go out there and seek information about how to effectively take care of and raise my child and what methods that I should employ for punishment, then I'm going to turn to studies like this and what actual psychologists and psychiatrists say.
Okay. Well, sorry about that. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good, man. Okay. I was going to say, I wanted to know, what is your, like, because Honcho, I don't think you have kids either, do you?
No, I don't. My old lady, she has a child, but I have no biological children of my own.
And what kind of exposure do you have to her kid? Is it anything with regularity?
Yeah. See, we are quite familiar with one another.
Do you take a more of like a backseat approach, like you're not my biological kid, like you can be more of like a friend to them if they need to, but like the punishment isn't your thing? Or are you like, hey, under my roof, this is my rules, so if you break my rules, you get my consequences?
I definitely lay down the law. There has to be some understanding, because my belief is, even, in a relationship, you have to have those masculine and feminine energies, and, it's what's best for the child. And so I think, as a fatherly figure, I'm not her father, like I say, but as a fatherly figure, I think that you may have to be the enforcer sometimes. The mother can be the nurturer. And I'm not saying, I don't spank her, I don't put my hands on her or anything like that. But, as far as, making sure she stays alive and doing certain things, I do take an active role in those type of situations, because, like, one, especially if we're out in public and shit, I'm not with that being embarrassed type situation. And also just because I know, as a child, sometimes she needs structure, and sometimes I know there's things that her mom she'll be oblivious to, and I'll point those things out, and, like I say, just because I feel like it's what's best for the long run. So I feel like I do my part to make sure that I'm making her I'm putting a long-term investment in her future.
Right.
I don't believe about letting children run wild, because and this is why I say, in speaking about how I feel, and about, I think there's some before, hearing some of this information from this study and some other things that I did, look around this week, there's always been this cultural association, in my book, that I've always, me and everybody I've known has always gotten spanked. Sometimes
absolutely.
It'll be whatever you want to call it. I can talk about, like I say, switches, shoes, belts, a variety of items. Sometimes whatever's closest by. Now, I wouldn't say that I was ever abused, but I definitely, had my share of spankings. And,
right.
We mentioned it. We were speaking offline before we got on, and I started to think about some things as I was younger. And, we were talking about the long-term effects, and we were talking about the outcomes. And I know a lot of people say, well, shit, spanking, kept me out of jail. Spanking. Well, I know also a lot of people who got their asses whooped, and they still, they still end up in shit. I've had my situations, and so it worked for a temporary time, but then it made me, look at certain things differently. And I talk about, maybe certain risks and things that I may not have taken initially in my life because of those repercussions that came with spankings. But that doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have a permanent hold, in my opinion.
Right.
But as I was looking into these things this week, and some other things, I was looking at some other cultures. And because at first I thought, it was going to be, mainly like an American thing. But then when you presented the information, that it was more worldwide and not just an American thing. That's what I find it pretty interesting, because I know that, a lot of Africans in those countries, they believe, in spanking shit. When they bring it to America, they definitely believe in proper punishment for the children, because that's what keeps them in line. That's what gets them going to college. And a lot of people feel like spanking is what keeps children in line. But after hearing certain, the research and things, it makes me, think about it and question. Now, I personally, but this is how I feel. Honestly, as I've been, mulling it over and thinking about it, I feel like, and I don't know to the extent of how they did their research, and I know that they talked about people who spanked and weren't beaten, but I think that there's only so much talking maybe you can do. And so when it gets to a point,
Yes.
what
Yes.
what would you suggest, or was there any information in the research that offered an alternative suggestion before getting to that position of spanking as the ultimate, as the last choice? I mean, what other
I
alternatives?
did, man. There was this dude that wrote this book called Love and Logic, and I definitely recommend it because he said when your kids are little, if you think that spanking them is more effective than depriving them of time and access to you, then you're dead wrong. And I was like, what is this guy talking about? So instead of saying, your son is being bad or whatever like that, he would just go and say, I don't want to talk to you right now. I'm going to go to my room. Like, don't send the kid to his room. You remove yourself from the child. And this is obviously not like, the kid's about to put his hand on a burning pot thing or whatever like that. I'm not talking about an example like that. I'm saying in a situation where your kid is just driving you up a wall. You're tired of him, right? Why would you spank him whenever you're the one who's tired of his behavior because he's 2 years old and he's just testing the limits of his world, right? He said the most effective thing that he ever did was to tell his son, nope, I'm tired of you. I don't want to be around you right now. I'm going to go to, like, daddy's going to go to his room and you can stay out here. And he said his son just bawled at the door, man, and, sliding notes under the door and all kinds of stuff like that. So in the right situations, you just got to realize, sometimes that, like, it's not your kid too. You are part of that whole ordeal. But that's what I say. Like, I was a middle child, so I know how wild kids can get. But part of the reason that I was wild as a middle child is because I've never had a really strict parenting. That was just something that was missing with me. Now, my aunts who had other kids, they like to spoil their other kids. And if I was over at their house and I did something wrong, man, I got whacked upside the head with a pasta spoon one time, dude. My aunt would get a hold of your little ass with anything that she could, whatever was within arm's reach. And then as I got a little bit older, my parents started having issues, and that worked its way out into, what happened with, like, me and my brother and stuff like that. So it was a completely new change for me, Why is daddy always mad? But yeah, that was a complete shocker for me because that was a completely different change. So having gone through stuff like that, it was it was crazy. But no, the biggest thing in alternative methods to how to deal with your kids is understanding that you're dealing with a human brain that's not completely developed. And I get it, there is always an exception to every rule. But 99 times out of 100, or probably like 80 times out of 100, you could say, you know what, man, I'm just getting frustrated because I don't know how to make this little dude act right. I'm going to remove myself from the situation. And then your kid won't understand why. All he's going to know is that's completely different and out of the norm. And he doesn't like it whenever you're not right there with him.
Okay. Okay. And so now I think about, some of these things that we're talking about, and having positive and negative effects, and, talking about alternative solutions and things. And again, like I said, I recall instances in my past, and I was actually having a phone conversation with my mom the other day. We talked for about 3 hours on the phone about a bunch of stuff. It wasn't all about spanking, but we were talking about some of my younger cousins, and, they're getting up there in age, about to be graduating high school and some other things. And, they're a little bit odd, a little bit different. You could say they're spoiled. You could say that they're, just they could definitely use some behavior modification because they don't take it. They don't appreciate anybody. They take everything for granted. In situations like this, once a certain particular behavior has been established in a child, that it could be difficult to change. The children, they kind of develop, I want to believe they said about 7 or 8 is when a child has kind of developed their personality and things like that. So when if you get into a situation where it's a little bit far gone and, the child is a little bit more rebellious, And the situation, where they're a little bit more independent minded. So you say you remove yourself from the situation, and they're kind of content with, being with their own dealings. Is there a solution or any alternative or something like that that you think could remedy a situation like that?
That is an incredibly good question. For me, I can't answer that one because I'm not either a child or an early adolescent psychologist. But let me think about this one for just a second. How do I want to put this? I don't want to say that, like, if you fell into those other steps the entire time, then you wouldn't have issues quite like that. But I think that the older that a child gets, especially whenever they get like the age that like my nieces and nephews are now, they hate being treated like a baby. So I think that a little bit more ridicule would go far there. But at the same time, the terrible twos, you're talking about two completely different subjects when you move into someone who's developed a little bit more, because they're forming their opinion of who they are as a person. That's tough, man. That would have to be handled on a case-by-case basis. But like I said, I'm not a child psychologist. I just read a couple of research papers.
Yeah.
But no, that's really a good one. I'm going to come back to that one. That's kind of like when we were talking about guns in schools and everything like that. I was like, man, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, dude, because that's just that's happening right now.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that is because I kind of look at my situation. Like I say, I'm the the new entity in this situation, and
right.
Like I said, her daughter, she's about I guess that's maybe not being a very good father figure if I don't know how old she, but she's 8. Bullshitting, but she's about 8, about that age, and she's kind of at that point where she's developing her own personality. She's had her own previous experiences before I ever came into the picture, so what I'm bringing to the situation is still relatively new to her, and there's still a little bit of, well, initially there was some pushback because it was kind of like, who are you and how are you, kind of, it wasn't like that, she followed her, but there was still like, it was a new territory for her. It was uncomfortable for her, you could tell, to be kind of corrected and disciplined, because for the most part, her mom and family members and I, because her father actually passed away when she was really young, and I think that they show sympathy for that incident by just treating her baby fine. They babied her a lot, mm-hmm. And so she has a lot of mannerisms that are really young. And so my thing is that, okay, well, there's certain behaviors that we need to correct, because one is some of these things you're just too old to be doing still. And so slowly but surely we've corrected these behaviors. And like I said, it doesn't require any physical discipline, and I've utilized more so, having to take things away and stuff like that, and like I said, because she wouldn't have that type of attachment to me, as that you mentioned earlier, with a parent, them removing themselves from the situation. So that's why I was kind of asking that other question, like I said, because but it might also be different, me not being a biological parent. So you have kind of a whole different factor going there that might not be the same as as it would be with 2 biological parents or a single biological parent, whatever it may be. So that's why
right.
that just kind of came to light.
Well, you always know your kids the best. This is just it's a conversation. It's we're out to try to help the world. You know what I mean? Leave here better than you came. Maybe it won't be an earth-shattering realization for you, but next time that you find yourself in one of these situations and you're like, you know what, man, I'm gonna take 5, and I just need to get away from you right now. You never know, it might work. Like my one of my really good buddies, he and his wife did counseling a lot, and it's kind of funny because people, unless they have something terribly wrong, they don't think that counseling is necessary. But as far as marriage is concerned, like, you got to think, with a counselor and all of the people that have come before you, like what psychology is built on is case studies long before your time. You're not seeing anything that's a new challenge. You're not seeing anything that's impossible to overcome, unless your kid just cuts the heads off of dogs or something like that, and he's a little serial killer motherfucker, then, you're not dealing with something that the majority of people haven't already dealt with. So you can talk to a pastor, you can talk to anything like that, but I would just have to say, man, like, it's nothing that nobody's ever experienced before. We always kind of we have a tendency to victimize ourselves and be like, well, nobody's ever had to deal with, a kid like this, or my kid's just a little rebel. That dude's a little bastard. Because my dad said the same thing about me and because he raised two different families. I have three older brothers, and he raised them in a separate home than mine. We were born a lot later. So me and my other middle brother, the older middle brother, we both just completely got skipped on punishment, but we also got skipped on like the babying aspect of things. So by the time that we were teenagers, it was like, dude, I don't know you. I'm my own person. Like, I don't know where you're coming at me sideways with all this stuff, but I don't like it and I'm not going to deal with it. So, it's not really like abandonment issues, but no, that's a good question, man. That's a really good one. I'm gonna have to ponder on that one, but I don't think that it's anything that nobody's ever dealt with before, and that there's not an answer to it that's just like, well, that's not gonna work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that'll be something we have to look into, because like you said, there's always situations, there's always slight complications, and stipulations to the situation. So, but like we were saying, that the alternative methods. Now, something we had discussed previously, we had kind of initiated this conversation a while back in one of the Kush dens, and we were talking about supplementing spankings and things with exercise and workouts and things like that. And what do you see the benefit of that situation being more so than utilizing spankings and things of that nature? What's
the most that, like, you were talking about some stuff that you went through, and we were kind of sharing some stuff like that before. The worst that I ever got with corporal punishment was, like my aunt's, like the one time I remember she pulled a big spoon out of a scalding hot pot of spaghetti sauce and whacked me over the back of the head with it. And that was the most pain I've ever endured from that particular type of punishment. But I've also done wall sits. And you will remember for about 4 or 5 days, especially if you're a young teenager and you're in sports and everything and you've got to be active, and your old man makes you do wall sits for 30 minutes straight because you jacked up, you're going to remember that for days afterwards. But you remember the lesson, you remember, why your legs hurt more than you remember your old man beating the crap out of you, or even just, spanking you. It does create a lot of distrust in authority and in parental figures. Man, I will never ever forget having to run laps or do wall sits or anything like that for sports. That, to me, I still remember lessons that I learned whenever I was in sports more than anything my parents ever taught me at all.
That's interesting. So that you mentioned that, and it kind of has a similar outcome, because the thing is, and this is what really got me kind of really much more curious about this conversation, because like you mentioned, running, you're doing wall sits, and trust me, I remember some, and I don't ever think I had to do them for 30 minutes straight. But the lingering pain after concluding that, with the wall sits, it may hurt then, but those next few days when you can't sit down properly and you catching cramps or whatever else it may be that's going on, will be steady reminders. Now, with a spanking, once you kind of get over that, it is what it is. It'll last a couple of hours maybe, or whatever it is. But then you do kind of question, like you said, the outcome with the wall sits, with the running, with the thing. At least you feel strengthened, even though you went through pain and a little bit of pain to get there. You come out stronger than you were. What happens in a situation when, you just have a child that's so hard-headed that they just tolerate? They just go through it. You end up building a monster maybe that is used to all this working out, has done all these wall sits, and is still bad as shit. How do you stop something like that? Those are probably a special case, but how do you stop something like that? That's
how much of a man do you feel like today? You gonna tell that boy to strap? You gonna tell him to strap the gloves on and get in the garage?
You might have, but that might be the last draw if nothing else is working.
Man, every once in a while, you're gonna build a mongoloid up like that. Yeah. No, I think in that particular case, those things, I recognize that they did make me a lot stronger, but I didn't ever mistrust the authority that used that sort of punishment. I never looked at, like my coaches or whenever my parents employed techniques like that, I never looked at them and said, you know what, man, like, screw these people. I don't care. I don't trust any of them as far as I can throw them, because it was, pain retains, man. It's when you do that for several days, hurting from doing a bunch of wall sits, you're like, all right, well, I'm just not going to do some stupid shit like that again, and that's the end of that.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, do you think it's because the actual, when you're doing wall sits and when you're doing, you're running and you're doing these things, I mean, it's more so, even though you're being instructed to do so, it's more so self-inflicted. But as opposed to, you getting spanking or you're getting struck by something, this is a person who tells you, hey, I love you, I care about you, and, I want the best for you, but I got to beat your ass for a little bit because, I don't like what you're doing. Do you think that's the difference, the actual impact of someone else coming in contact with you as opposed to you, like I say, that being kind of a self-inflicted situation?
Yeah, man. I remember whenever I used to have to run laps and stuff like that, you got all that time to think about what you did, all that time that you're out there running, and then how much it's going to hurt over the next few days, and all the recovery time that you got to go through. You got all that time to sit there and think about, what exactly it was that happened. And so when you do stuff like that and you're going through that, it's going to have a much longer standing effect when you consider why it is that, whatever's happening to you is happening to you, if that makes sense.
Okay. Now, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong. Like I said, I've never, served in the military or anything like that. But from what I've heard, it's somewhat of the idea. But then I've heard people say it's kind of gotten softer, it's become different. But the idea is that a lot of people come in believing they're one way, and they break you down to build you up.
Yep.
Do you think that this is kind of a similar situation? I mean, it would be a similar effect with utilizing an exercise structure of punishment as opposed to that? I mean, or do you think I'm sure there's significant differences because there's probably a structured method in which the military uses and they plan to do that, but as opposed to punishment, do you think that has a similar outcome in that type of situation?
I think that it does, man. When you go through, say, like a Marine Corps boot camp, for example, for the first month, you aren't allowed to refer to yourself as, nothing is yours, nothing is mine, nothing is theirs. It's this recruit, that recruit, those recruits. It builds like, a different mindset because you're not even yourself anymore. You are a recruit in Marine Corps boot camp. And sometimes it takes a big culture shock like that to break all of the habits that you have that you didn't know, not saying that they're bad habits, but to instill military discipline in somebody like that, you have to start from scratch. So from a psychological standpoint, it's a giant culture shock. It's ridiculous. And you're like, what in the hell have I gotten myself into? But then once you start getting the hang of it during the second month that you're there, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I just can't be late to anything ever, period. Or I'm going to have my face in the dirt and I'm going to be doing push-ups until the cows come home. But I think that that's actually a really good example of just using stuff like that as a pain retain type thing, because while you're actually doing those exercise and getting put through the paces, they're continuously telling you why it is that you were jacked up. So then you got to get up the next day and you've got to go through the obstacle course. You've got to do your regular PT. You've got to sit in class and pay attention even though you're hurting, And then they'll it's called incentive training. They'll IT the living shit out of you, and then you got to clean your uniform off. You've got to deal with the repercussions of what you've done, and everybody else pays for what you've done. So if you have multiple kids, that might be an approach that you can have with them. It's like, okay, well, he decided that he was going to go do this, so now everybody is going to be deprived of this, and we're going to go outside and do, whatever. You guys are going to run, or you're going to hold your arms out straight in front of you, or whatever like that. It's a way of getting through to them physically that doesn't involve you being the person that acts out on them.
Now, you just said something that I really want to speak on. I'm glad you mentioned it because it's something I thought about before. And well, actually, when I was looking at some things, earlier this week, and it was a guy, but now he was talking about spanking, and his ideology was that he had two small children, and he says, I really don't like spanking. That's kind of a last resort thing, and I forgot what it was that they did, but even though it was one child in particular that did it, he decided to spank. Well, he spanked. That's awful. He spanked both.
He spunked him.
Yeah, that would be bad. He spanked both of them, and you say his reasoning behind that was to build solidarity between them as brothers. So if one of them goes through it, they both go through it. So in order for them to kind of look out for each other, like, hey, you don't do this and I won't do this, and we're a team, and he says in his opinion that builds them as a stronger bond for life, as opposed to just one of them getting the other one wanting to watch and laugh and say ha, this happened to you and not to me. So I mean,
right.
and I kind of see that correlation in what you were talking about, being responsible for yourself, and then what you're doing has an impact on everybody else.
It's accountability. I'm not only accountable to myself for the consequences of my actions. There are other people who have a stake in this game. There's other people who can pay the price for what I've done.
Okay.
So accountability is also another great method that could be employed for that. It's not just you, and that also teaches them that the world's not only about them. It's there's consequences that other people have to pay for the actions that you choose to take. But that's good. I'm glad you asked about that one, because nobody's ever really asked me about corporal punishment in the military as it relates to children. Because I know a lot of guys who have extremely well-behaved kids that were in the Marine Corps like I was, and they refuse to spank their kids, but they have exceptionally well-behaved kids. Now that's not to say that they don't have slip-ups. They're not perfect. They're children. It's almost like they were put on Earth to be the bane of your existence sometimes. But yeah, man. So that was a good question.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, well, like I say, I see some folks in here, and I know that we're still relatively new in the Saw Society thing, and so I kind of want to let folks know how it goes. But with the Saw Society, like I say, we pay attention to the chat, but we don't interact in the chat as much. But what I'm thinking is, like I said, we got a couple of minutes we can do it. I see a couple of good questions. I kind of do want to touch on it. I see people reaching out, but I want you guys to get familiar with the Saw Society. Like I said, we're going to start picking, specific topics to address, each episode. And we're going to get this thing on a regular track. It's just been some little hiccups here and there on my behalf, but we got things in order, hopefully in order. And so what we want to do is, if you guys come across interesting discussions, interesting things, and I mean, we can talk about a wide variety of topics. We really want to stick, dealing with things like manhood, things with, that go on in society. We can talk about, some of the how do I want to put it? We can talk politics. We can talk about identity politics, if you will, those type of things that are going on, rights, equality, all these things. But if you come across some stories or a topic in particular that you would like, we have an email set up, so that way during the week, we can collaborate and kind of pick some things that we make sure we can do a proper amount of research and things like that. And it's the society mailbag at Gmail. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and type it in the thing.
Yeah, I typed it in a little bit earlier. It is up in the chat. Yeah, societymailbag at gmail.com. And that'll be part of what we do. So Edman, I see that you gave me something that highlighted. Somebody shouted me out. Oh, it was Edman again. Is it different spanking a girl than a boy, and how does it affect the child depending on the gender? So I don't know if you caught the very beginning of the stream, but with women, they have a higher propensity, if you use corporal punishment on them, they have a higher propensity to stay in an abusive relationship, and with men, they have a higher propensity to be an abusive partner. And then if you want to look at just like how it affects everybody, period, there's stress hormones. No matter what your intentions are, it's not saying like if you spank your kids, it's abuse, but if you spank your kids, there is a physiological effect that has psychological ramifications. Their body is going to do something when you spank them that's going to affect their mind. And one of the biggest effects that there is the release of stress hormones. So when you get into a fight or flight situation, and you can see this perfectly, like whenever your kids are scared, whenever they're trying to cover their backside and saying, like, no, don't spank me, like they're telling you that they don't want that done. They go into fight or flight mode, and their body dumps a chemical cocktail into their bloodstream from the adrenal gland, and there's all kinds of stuff like that. We call it the chemical cocktail in the Marine Corps. The biggest thing is that whenever you are in fight or flight mode, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's responsible for thinking, shuts down. You're operating at the brain capacity of a lizard. The only thing that you learn is to associate whatever activity it was that you were doing, even if you find it pleasurable, with that. So let's say you were just trying to do something that you were enjoyed doing as a kid, and you got yanked up by the arm and spanked. Well, it creates a negative feedback loop where you don't enjoy something like that anymore. So it damages that part of the pleasure center as well. You don't derive as much pleasure from something like that anymore. I'm not saying it completely turns you off, like, I got my ass whooped for playing video games too much, and I still love playing video games. But the other portion of it is that the chemical cocktail has negative effects on the prefrontal cortex in that it damages the ability for that particular section of the brain to grow. So especially in young people that are, below the age of 12, 13 years old, potentially, not you are, but potentially you're damaging your child's ability to learn and absorb information and to develop good neural connections in the future. So it's not what your intent is whenever you spank your children, it's what the effects are on the human body and on the mind as a result of that. And Ed, man, I absolutely enjoyed my experience in the Marines. Everything that I do in the entire day, I'm thankful for joining the Marine Corps because it made me who I am.
Interesting. Now, before we get out of here, I just have a question, and I mean, I guess I'm sure, like I said, because what you looked into for the most part was about children, and this is definitely way off topic, but I'm curious, what do you think that there's any correlation? And like I say, this is going to be kind of a stretch, but do you believe that there's any correlation? Because we talked about women who are more likely to be abused if they were spanked and things like that. Do you think that there's any correlation between, people who were spanked as children and then those who grow up to have some of those more intense type fetishes, who, are into things like that, who turn that from a thing that was negative at one point in time and eventually try to turn it into something that has become sexual for them? Do you think that there's a correlation between that?
I would have to say that would depend largely on what kind of relationship they had with with their authority figure that was using corporal punishment like that. The reason I say that is you see a lot of kids that you just know that they're like a mama's boy, right? Yeah. So whenever they grow up, they're going to have issues with intimacy with women. And maybe the only way that they can actually achieve that is through being submissive to a woman, and that could be that. But again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just an asshole who read a couple of articles this week. But yeah, dude, I think that makes perfect sense as far as I'm concerned. It makes sense to me. It does. It makes perfect sense to me as to what that would look like.
I mean, yeah, that's a good correlation. I mean, because I know that's a thing, and like I said, I know not to be funny, but seriously, I mean, because I wonder, like, to me, that's not something that I've quite understood. Not say that I haven't participated in the, I know women like those kind of things, but I just kind of wondered, does that correlate? You said so many people have had 80% of people have been through corporal punishment, have received corporal punishment. That's a thing that's prevalent. But with that being said, I think we're going to call this one a wrap. I think society needs a round table. That's something that we can consider in the future. Once things grow,
absolutely.
And once things start getting up, I think that would be a good idea to have some real discussion. Because I know that I've seen a few dissenting opinions in the chat, and I think that would be a very interesting situation.
That's what it's all about, man.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, there's nothing wrong with entertaining, alternative opinions. Like I say, and like I say, it helps you bolster your argument, or maybe you may be introduced into something that may change your mind, may better your life. So I have no, and then, I mean, that's what I mentioned. I'm glad you said that, Ed, man. That's the thing, because it was, how sometimes you have that idea in the back of you, like, there's something I was supposed to say. And I'm like, I don't want to, I was about to wrap it up, but I don't want to wrap it up because I'm like, there's something I want to say, but I feel like I'm going to be mad as soon as we get out of here. And I'm like, oh, that's what I meant to say. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the game that you're playing?
Oh, man. Okay. Guys, this game that I'm playing right now is digital crack. It seems dumb on the surface. It really does. It's a game called Kerbal Space Program. You can look it up. It's you build your own spacecraft, and you can go on missions and stuff like that and fly them around. But it's a physics-based game. So while you're playing this game, you're learning all sorts of stuff about like rocket design and how much speed you need to get to a certain planet, and how much planning actually goes into, say, like a NASA mission or something like that. And at the same time, it teaches you about orbital mechanics and how difficult it is to actually achieve some of the stuff that, like our space program has been able to achieve. So it's called Kerbal Space Program. They're about to have a big DLC for it, where they put like the Saturn V rockets and all kinds of stuff like that. And yes, Ed, man, I'm a huge physics geek. I love the study of nature and of why things are the way they are and why things happen the way that they happen. So this appeals to me because I'm a huge space, NASA, and physics geek. But everybody that I've ever introduced to this game enjoys playing it a hell of a lot. And I got a buddy that I just introduced to it, and he said right now he wakes up early in the mornings so that he can go and try to figure out more of this game and play some of it before he goes off to school and everything. So it's just something that I enjoy doing, and I share it with anybody that I have the opportunity to share it with, because it's kind of a passion, and it's just a damn good game, man. It's really fun. So I'm not sure how much it costs right now. Whenever I bought it, it was $40, but yeah, it's a Kerbal Space Program.
Okay. Well, that's what's happening. So, like I say, I'm glad that we got that, because that would have bothered me. But so, I want to say thank you to everybody who came in and joined us. And as I say, we're going to get this thing structured. We're going to get this in order. We just had a couple little hiccups last week, but we're going to make sure we get this on a consistent basis, most likely on Sunday evenings, at least once a week. And then, if we can find, if it starts to get some traction, maybe we can increase that. And, just in case, some special topics and, excuse me, they may come up or things like that, we'll definitely try to cover those, as promptly as possible. But again, if y'all have any specific things y'all want to talk about, if y'all come across an article or something that you guys have interest in, you would like to have discussed in Sauce Society, make sure you send it to societymailbag@gmail.com, and we will definitely make sure to touch on that. Is there anything you'd like to say to the society before we get up out of here, Mr. Man Things?
No, man, I'm good. I enjoy doing this, dude. So if we have 8 people or 800, we'll keep on rolling like this, because it's always a good conversation, man, and it's always very cerebral. It's stuff that you didn't think about before. So I enjoy that the most, is just having people ask me stuff where it's like, you know what, man, I didn't think about that. But Honcho, are you rolling through to the Kush Den after this? You got to get a minute to get pre-rolled.
Yeah, I'll probably actually pre-roll in the den and get everything. Just got to change everything over. So yeah, it will be a Kush Den after this. I'll see Real Family Ask. Yeah, so we'll definitely be in the den after this. Probably about 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes or so. Get everything in order.
If anybody wants to know, we don't get advertising revenue on this channel, so feed Scotty. The only thing that we can do is recommend great stuff. Y'all know that I do like my wine and the Kush Den and stuff like that. But this week is brought to you by Red's Blueberry Ale. This shit is delicious. So definitely get out there and try it.
Man, that's what
that's all I got.
I like Red's. Actually, I drank a Red's in one of the dens earlier this week, and but it wasn't a blueberry. But Red's is actually pretty good about some of those flavors. the old lady, she likes a lot of that red stuff, and she would try all the flavors. So I'd steal one or two every now and then when she'd grab a 6-pack of those, and they were actually pretty good. I know they have some seasonal ones too, So
Yeah,
Reds
yeah.
are definitely something to check out. So yeah, like I said, we'll be at the den here shortly, and I want to say thank you to each and everybody who came through for the second Sauce Society. And like I said, I look forward to seeing you guys in some of the future Sauce Societies. And if not, then I'll see you guys in the den shortly. And again, shout out to Man Things for being a wonderful host, answering some very intricate and intriguing questions, and also taking the time out to do the research and share the knowledge that he came across with us, because researching is a very time-consuming thing. So I sincerely appreciate that. And again, we'll be doing this again soon, and send those questions to Society Mailbag. But with that being said, hey, all of y'all, again, be cool like y'all be cool, and we're going to see y'all later in the Sauce Society. Y'all have a good evening. I'll see you then.